friend once told me that reading the scriptures was like looking at light refracted through a prism. If you turn the prism slightly or shift where you are sitting, the colors change. So it is with the scriptures when we approach them from a different angle or a different perspective, we can see something new. Today's scripture is one we are familiar with. We hear it in some form whenever we gather at the table. The focus usually seems to be on the elements of the bread and wine. For centuries, churches have argued over at what point the elements become the body and blood of Christ. Is it when they are blessed? Is it when we take and eat and drink them? Or are the elements merely symbolic and in reality only bread and wine? I'm not sure that's important or even worth arguing over. Instead, if you indulge me a bit, I'd like to take the prism with which we read this scripture and shift it slightly. One of the benefits of being a gamma is getting to watch all the animated children's movies over and over and over again. A couple of years back, JD was hooked on the movie Coco. For those who haven't seen it, it's a Day of the Dead-based movie where one day of the year, the dearly departed can cross over the veil and celebrate life with the living loved ones, but only if they are remembered with a photo on the family's memorial altar. If someone is not honored with a photo, then after so many years of being forgotten, they will fade away into oblivion. They need to be remembered. It must be over 20 years now since my niece came to visit from Massachusetts. And in the quiet of the evening, after her cousins had gone to bed, we were chatting and she said, "Tell me about Gamma." My mother, her Gamma, died when I was in high school and only had the pleasure of meeting 2 of her grandchildren. My niece was not among them. Good, stoic German families don't usually broach these emotional subjects, but the only way my niece and her cousins would know their grandmother was if those who knew her shared their stories. I remember one time when, or she made the best, or I can still see her and Pop-Pop doing the polka, or her smile could light up the room. And so we sat, and I told stories, and we remembered. To remember is more than just bringing something to mind. It is putting it back together, a remembering, recollecting the parts, and for a brief time, allowing the dearly departed to cross over the veil into our consciousness and celebrate life with the living. Whenever Michael's folks used to come visit, we would have one night where the whole family would gather at the Outback in Bremerton. This was the one meal where my future daughter-in-law wanted to make sure she was present. She wanted to hear the family stories and share in the laughter. She wanted to hear what would become her story and her children's stories. She wanted to hear the stories so that at a future date, she could join in the remembering. And now we gather, a few less people physically present, but the same stories and some new ones are shared, keeping those no longer present in our consciousness. Jesus and the disciples gathered in the upper room to celebrate the Passover, to remember God delivering their ancestors from enslavement in Egypt, to celebrate that the angel of death passed over their doorways, protecting their firstborn sons from the death that the slave owner's sons experienced. The food at the Seder would have reflected the salty tears, the bitterness and the sweetness. And I am guessing that the 13 men gathered round the table in the upper room shared stories, not just the Passover stories, but stories of their lives. And I am guessing they laughed and celebrated and remembered. And during this traditional celebration meal, Jesus took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Eat. This is my body. Every time you do this, remember me. Every time you gather and share a meal, remember me." I see future gatherings of the disciples as they sit around the table or campfire or in their fishing boats, as a time they shared food and told stories of their dear friend. Do you remember that time Jesus got upset with us because we tried to keep the children away from him? Or that time he drank at the well with that Samaritan woman? Or that time he was at the wedding in Cana and they ran out of wine and he turned the barrels of water into more wine, even better? How about that time he walked on the water and Peter tried to do it and nearly drowned? Or that time. And in those moments of sharing their stories, Jesus was present to them in their hearts. In those moments of sharing, Jesus was remembered. So I'd like to challenge you, when you head out to social hall for a cup of coffee and a bit to nibble on, don't talk about church business today. Instead, sit with someone and share the stories. Maybe they are the stories of Jesus from your Sunday school days, or maybe they are more personal stories of Jesus, the Emmanuel, the God with us who has touched our life, held us when we cried, comforted us when we mourn, laughed with us when we finally succeeded in doing that impossible task that there is no way we could do. I'd like to challenge you to share the stories and remember.